We're talking with David Webb. He's a financial expert. He's been around for decades studying how the markets have evolved. He's made a lot of money on Wall Street, very successful investor. He's retired now, so he's not giving investment advice, but what he is doing is sharing with us the trillions of dollars of derivatives and the massive debt and how that could potentially impact your stock portfolios. So David, you were talking about how much derivative exposure there was. Go back to that.
Okay, well, I started becoming concerned about the scale of derivatives in the very early 2000s. And at that point, derivatives were about 100 trillion to 120 trillion, so about twice global GDP at that point. Very large. Now, by 2007, 2008, this had gone to 700 trillion. So from 100 trillion to 700 trillion in 5 years. So at that point, it was 10 times global GDP. It's now estimated that derivatives might be 2 quadrillion, which would be maybe 20 times global GDP. Now, what has enabled this is the use of all the public's securities as collateral, free of payment and without restriction. This is the public's securities are held in these vast pools without any specific identification to securities so that they can be used as collateral by others.
And this has all become legal. They've papered this over in the UCC and other laws.
They have papered it over. Initially, it was being done, it was industry practice prior to 1994. After the dematerialization, they began doing this on a big scale. But then once they fixed it, they papered it over in the UCC in 1994. I think it's no coincidence that that is when derivative instruments just began exploding at that point. So there is a direct connection, this free use of collateral. People should understand they're intimidated by the term derivative, and it is kind of intimidating, but it is basically, it's a contract. It's not a real thing itself. It's not a security itself. It is just a contract written about the behavior of something else that results in a payment between parties in one direction or another. So originally, this was done for things like farmers selling their crops forward at a future date. There was actually a societal purpose to these contracts. But now this has been set up, I believe, in order to take the real things. So the derivative contracts are not real things themselves, but through this very sophisticated scheme, they can be used to take the real securities and assets from others.
Yeah, now let me jump in here. In the movie, you gave an analogy. It was an amazing analogy. You said, imagine you go to your car dealer, you pay cash for the car, you buy the car, you drive it home, you drive it for a couple of years, you think it's yours, and then somebody comes up, shows up with a piece of paper and repos it from you. And what you didn't know is the car dealer had secured all of their loans, debt, or whatever with the cars they had sold, and you'd signed in that agreement and they just take it from you. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, and you know, you and I talked about this before. People get concerned about their cars when they hear this analogy, and there's good news and bad news here. The good news is it's not about your car. The bad news is it's much worse because it's about the global financial system and all securities. So the securities of individual investors, as well as securities held in investment funds, in pension plans, investors that are sophisticated, that have been told that their securities are segregated. We know from a Federal Reserve document, which was a response to something called the Legal Certainty Group in Europe. This was in 2006, that even segregated accounts are not protected. they will receive only a pro rata share of what remains in the pool after the secured creditors take the securities.